In part 1 of this episode on law and religion, we focused on the divine nature of rules as communicated and applicable to specific human societies. The belief in the divine origin of such rules is fundamental, since it generally means that such rules take precedence over any conflicting rules which humans make for themselves. They are also generally believed to be timeless, with consequences in the here and the hereafter. But human beings are not timeless, so how are such rules to continue from generation to generation? Must God relay these messages to a person or group every generation into perpetuity? Or must there continually be persons achieving enlightenment, willing and able to share the lessons thereof? How can mere mortals continue to relate to the timeless divine? The answer across the ages and societies seems to be a special class of humans devoted to making sure that God's messages remain alive and understood. Enter the shaman, the high priests and priestesses, the rabbi, the clergy, the imam, the monks, the voodoo intermediary, the tribal witch doctor. God seems to have some helpers on earth. Thoughts and beliefs about the divine go as far back as the earliest human societies. Since the human race has its roots in Africa, there is probably no better place to start with the topic of the human administration of divine law. In the Living Law Africa episodes, we saw how some of the world's religions, particularly Christianity and Islam, have taken a dominant place in African societies. But there were religious beliefs in African societies long before Arab traders or European colonizers brought and spread their own. Writings on the topic often describe these beliefs as animistic or animism. The term animism generally describes the idea of the divine as existing not necessarily in a single entity, but being manifested in all things, both animate and inanimate. In other words, God as omnipresent, existing in and through all things, the universe as one, with humans merely a small part. For the later arrivals in Africa who followed a monotheistic religion, forms of animism often appeared to be godless, and the respective societies as pagan. As we discover in many of the Living Law Nations episodes, this perception often had tragic consequences for the cross-societal relations, whether in Asia, the Americas, or Africa. I won't pretend to be an expert on animism, but I did learn a few things through exposure during certain Living Law trips. In West Africa, we visited a number of voodoo temples and centers and heard from the locals about the nature of animistic beliefs and practices.
Every 2 months, the pattern change also their speed.
Every 2 months?
2 months, they change the speed. We use this skin here to make a voodoo power, just to protect ourselves against the witch.
So how old is this one?
About 2 months.
2 months?
Yeah. This herb discovered the pattern at first time.
Yeah.
Here, both the pattern, one male and female, she discovered at first time. The priest of voodoo, when you become head of voodoo, it is like that. You must dress your clothes the rest of your life. So like a priest of church, you get his white clothes before to celebrate at the church.
So who is the priest in this picture?
All of them
are priests.
So if you see some people with these clothes like that, who dress the clothes like that, you must know this man is a doctor. is head of voodoo, priest of voodoo. Okay. So here the virgins, 41 virgins or 41 wise women, menopause women, who go into looking for the water every 7 years for this time. I said, every 7 years they sent 41 menopause women to bring back the sacred water. Here, the priest of this temple who want to sacrifice one cow for the robbery, which is 600 years old. The Pope is the big head.
Yes.
So, like for example, in Christian church, they have a Pope, and also the priest. So, Voodoo also has his Pope and he's a priest. So, both them here too on the page to celebrate the festival of Voodoo every 10th of January.
He has a python around his neck.
Yeah. So every 10th of January we celebrate the festival of Voodoo here. So we celebrate it on the beach.
Yes.
So they are here on the beach to celebrate the festival of Voodoo.
Just the phase 2 is okay, right?
Things I won't do for living law.
One of the common threads of animistic beliefs is the role of spirits in relation to human lives and the instrument of fetishes. Fetishes are objects which are deemed to have supernatural powers. They can come from nature or be made by humans. Again, West Africa is a great location for exploring the role and practice of spiritual fetishism.
But when somebody comes, she's going to see the fisherman come across it. She has to know the problem of the person. When the problem is natural, who is the voodoo problem. After the fisherman come out, choose the animal, different kind of the herbs. They are the concept of this problem.
So different problem, different animal.
Different animal, that's to know. Okay. So we bring the animal inside the home. After then we peel it. And sometimes we are going to ground, make the powder.
Yeah.
When we fresh the animal like the powder, this powder is not to drink, no. We can put it in the fresh water, then we bath.
Okay.
Sometimes we can put the powder we use in the body.
Yeah.
And sometimes we can take this powder to prepare the fetish like the amulet. Amulet, like the power. Yes, amulet. And the person take this one, go to use. This amulet can help the person, and the person gets what he needs. Dog.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. And this is the tortoise.
Tortoise.
Yes. Chameleon diets.
Yes.
Duck.
Duck. Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
The head of dog.
Yeah.
This is the owl.
Oh, yeah.
When somebody see the animal die, that's where the person bring it and sell it.
Okay.
But you don't kill the animal, bring
Not killed here.
Because we don't need the black magic and the market here, no.
Yeah.
We like to do the white magic. But the black magic is kill the people who do bad. But we don't need something like that here. So this is just for the decoration again. Yeah, how about this? This is the bone. Different kind of the snake. Like the vipers.
From the...
Yes.
Yeah.
Vipers, cobra, mamba. We are going to do something like the souvenir.
It is important to note that the very terms animism and fetish are ethnocentric terms coming down to us from outsiders trying to understand the religious practices and traditions of local peoples. Their frame of reference was generally European Christianity.
You can make a video.
Nor is animism, or the belief that all or some parts of nature incorporate a divine spirit, limited to Africa. In Living Law Japan, we saw how the Shinto religion has parallel thoughts. This worldview permeates the Japanese aesthetic and Japanese culture. But now that we've further expanded our scope and concept of spiritual beliefs, it's time to get back to the main topic of this segment, the human administration of divine matters. Just as African tribes have members who are blessed and/or trained to propagate local beliefs, most religions seem to have a group of persons entrusted with carrying divine teachings forward over time. This certainly applies to belief systems which were discovered, what we described in Part 1 as bottom-up religions, Such persons are essential for ensuring that ancient sermons and writings continue to be communicated to present generations. In many cases, those teachings exist in languages different from the ones now spoken in those very societies. Latin was the working language of the early Christian Church, as we learned during a visit to Toledo, Spain, to investigate one example of God's helpers on earth. So, as the second millennium AD progressed, more and more jurists turned their attention to bringing consistency to the law of the Church. Canon, or ecclesiastical law, describes the law of the Roman Catholic Church. As Christianity spread through Europe, particularly as the official state religion of the Roman Empire, canon law had a major influence on the rules of the various societies. Church leaders gathered periodically in councils or synods in an effort to manage this rapidly growing and increasingly diverse group of peoples which made up the Church. Following debate amongst the participants, such councils issued decrees to ensure consistency of church doctrine and practice. They also provided a platform for heathen leaders to join the church, thus further encouraging the spread of Christianity. Toledo hosted these councils for over 3 centuries, thus making it arguably the most important city in the Christian world after Rome. A classic example of this seen throughout Asia is the Buddhist Sangha and monastery. During the filming of Living Law Thailand, we visited several religious sites of both ancient and recent Thai kingdoms. Many of the former are located in empty ghost towns, having been plundered by enemies in earlier times. Most of the latter are still functioning monasteries, teaching the word of the Buddha and also some of the main tourist attractions in the country. Both types serve as examples of the intertwining of religion or spiritual beliefs and the political organization of the societies in question. The rulers were, and often still are, obligated to support and propagate the religion, assisted by a class of spiritual helpers. The role of religion in providing a motivator for cooperative human activity is one of the things which distinguishes human beings from other creatures. It permitted the creation of great civilizations which rivaled modern ones in terms of complexity, sophistication, and earthly power. Today, all that is left of most such civilizations are the ancient buildings and monuments. Internal dissension and/or outside aggression eventually led to their downfall. The role of spiritual administrators in the continued existence and practice of religion cannot be understated. In Living Law, Laos, we visited a Buddhist monastery and learned how the members depended on each other for mutual support and survival. We also saw how the monks were entirely dependent on the community for their basic needs. Each morning before dawn, the monks make the rounds to receive alms from the members of their communities. As in many religious societies, the monks have committed to a life of poverty and obedience. For those who have committed for life, this often means a life of celibacy as well. Others spend a fixed time in the monastery as part of their personal spiritual development, often around the time of entering adulthood. The idea of a religious class is hardly unique to Asia, nor is the role such individuals played in relation to the kingdom, clan, or tribe. In early Western civilizations, there were individuals tasked with making sure that spiritual ceremonies and practices were properly conducted. Indeed, the temporal authorities were, and some still are, dependent on the support of religious leaders. We will explore that interplay in more detail in Part 3 of this episode. So for now, let's get back to the institution of religious clergy. In addition to their role in transmitting spiritual wisdom and law to successive generations, many forms of clergy help preserve the rituals and practices of a given religion. We have already seen the crucial role played by religion in spreading awareness about divine law, as described in Part 1. In this Part 2, we have been exploring the human administration of divine law. Some form of clergy seems to exist in most, if not all, religions. In many cultures, appeasing the gods or spirits was a chief function of such individuals, with the material well-being of society tied to the success or failure of those collective efforts. Religious persons were not always so involved in society. In fact, sometimes they tried to avoid it. This was often the case with early Christian monastic orders. Monasteries and monastic life were a part of early Christianity. They are believed to have started in the territory of modern Egypt, with individuals attempting to remove themselves from society to better focus on spiritual matters in their relationship with their God. The idea accompanied Christianity as it spread to Europe and beyond. In fact, had it not been for the monasteries of Ireland and Britain, much of our knowledge about early European history and society may have been lost for good. Given that essential role and the pressure which surely comes with it, what is it which holds such religious orders and classes together? After all, they are also mere mortals, subject to the same human instincts and weaknesses. The answer, in short, seems to be law. Not general, including divine law, applicable to everyone, but specific rules applicable to those who voluntarily commit to service of their religion and the communities around them. Most of humankind are not members of such groups. So how can we appreciate or comprehend what life must be like for those men and women who have made a commitment to a particular religious order?
Here he comes.
How can we understand the role they are trying to play in the grand scheme of things?
Don't do it. It's not so bad. Oh.
In some religions, such spaces are off limits to all but insiders, or those considering becoming insiders. But in others, curious outsiders are allowed to catch a glimpse behind the scenes, such as during a spiritual retreat. Living Law was lucky enough to do just that. In the course of filming Living Law Austria, I spent 3 days as a guest in a Benedictine monastery in the Austrian Alps. Going to a monastery for a fixed period is certainly a different experience than entering it to remain for the rest of one's mortal life. But it does provide a feeling for the daily routine of the residents, as well as for their mission on earth. In relation to the main topic of this segment, the stay also permits us to explore one example of the specific law applicable to religious orders. In the Admont Monastery, that means the Regula Benedicti, or the Rules of Saint Benedict, the founder of the order. Upon arrival at the monastery, the monk in charge of receiving guests welcomed me and described the daily schedule of the residence. He even helped me carry my skis to my room, since I had spent the prior week investigating the legal aspects of tourism in Austria. Seriously. Like many Christian religious orders, the Benedictines have a tradition of hospitality towards travelers, something maintained down to the present. The guest rooms are simple and Spartan, with no TV and just 2 books, the Christian Bible and the Rules of Saint Benedict. In between services, which take place several times a day, walks, and 3 meals, I had enough time to study the rules of the order. These have remained unchanged since the 6th century, when the order was founded. But in a nutshell, the main expectations of members of the order are a lifetime commitment to poverty, chastity or celibacy, and obedience. Lest one accuse living law of bias or preference, I did not limit my investigation of monastic life to how monks live in a Christian monastery. In the course of filming Living Law Germany, I also made a retreat to a Christian nunnery to see how the other gender does monastic life. My hostesses were members of the female branch of the Benedictine order. The members of the order also commit to observe the Regula Benedicti. My stay in Admont a year earlier thus provided a good foundation for my retreat at Fraueninsel. The daily routine was essentially the same as in the Admont monastery. As a male visitor, I was subject to some additional restrictions compared to female visitors. All in all, however, the experience was a helpful one to understand the commitment of members of religious orders, male and female. It also provided unique insight into their mission, extending as it does to supporting the spiritual well-being of all humankind. Throughout their history, the orders have also played an integral role in the economic and educational life of the communities they serve. This seems to parallel the role played by such individuals in other faiths, though just how it is manifested may differ. Having at least an outline of the institutional framework and context of religions is essential to our later examination of religion's interplay with temporal power and authority, the focus of Part 3. There we shall come back to the role of what we have called God's administrators on earth. As we shall see, this was not always limited to a life of solitude and devotion. For now, let's close part 2 with some beautiful scenes from Fraueninsel.